Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to start up the webinar now. It looks like we're at 8 a.m. So thanks a lot, Gerald, for joining us. And thanks everybody else for joining us for the webinar, How to Use FME as an Enterprise Integration Platform. Let's get into it. Who we are Safe Software. That's myself. I'm Aaron Koning, Product Manager for FME Desktop and FME Server. And we're also joined by Gerald Dotson, Senior Data Architect for Grant County Public Utility District, or Grant PUD, who is really I like to call him the FME pilot within that organization. And he'll do a presentation halfway through to show a really interesting story, what they've done with FME. So before we go too far, we'll do a poll to really understand who has joined us this morning. So we're going to talk at all the different levels there about FME, about the webinar, about enterprise integration. So let's get started. Let's get into it. And here's the agenda for today. Talking about enterprise data integration, FME case studies, doing some demos. We're going to have a great presentation from Gerald. And then at the end, if you stick around, we'll do questions and answers as well. So why are we doing this webinar? Why is it important to talk about this? Really, the challenge is that technology is always changing, especially in software. Really, that's one of the industries that changes the fastest. And so, new solutions are always possible. You can bring in these different systems. However, anytime you have change is difficult in general. Human change is really tough, getting people to change the way they operate. But then even just changing systems is very, very hard. FME is a tool that enables that change. It enables that digital transformation, whether that be in the purest form of going from paper to digital, or whether that be reimagining what you do in your organization. FME allows you to integrate with virtually any system. And when you're integrating, you need to be able to transform your data models. And that's FME allows that as well. And an important aspect of FME is you don't have to code. There's no requirement to write Java code or C++ or anything like that. You just use an interface, which you're going to see a lot more of coming up. So when we talk about enterprise systems, these are the types of things we're talking about, this variety of systems, and there's many, many more. In this webinar, we're going to focus on CRMs, customer relationship management systems, customer information systems, and ERP or accounting financial systems. We're going to talk about those, and Gerald will talk about those in the second half as well. So, no webinar would be complete without a slide talking about all the systems and data types we support. Now, what I want to talk about mostly, though, is the extensibility of FME. If you have traditional systems that it looks like FME doesn't support, generally through JDBC, you can actually connect to those systems, those traditional systems. Or more importantly nowadays with modern systems, cloud systems, they have REST APIs. And we have a rich tool set to connect and authenticate and authorize and work with REST APIs. And you're going to see some of that today. Of course, once you've got the actual data integration workflows happening, you then want to sort of start to automate those things and have them kick off when events happen, such as schedules, or when another system wants to call out using a REST API, or if you have messages coming from different systems. And of course, you can send out messages to other systems as well using FME. So that's a little bit about FME, and now we're going to launch another poll. About half of the people are sort of not sure, but I'm sure they're interested in what's possible. And then Salesforce is up there. Oracle is interesting up there as well, and SAP as well. So Salesforce we're definitely going to talk about today, and touch on Dynamics as well. And I'll flip back to the slides. So thanks for sharing that. That gives a sense of what you guys are interested in. So for those who haven't joined us before, in using FME or haven't used FME much, you're going to run into terminology that I want to just upfront explain. Transformers are these little blue boxes like this one called the creator that are used to connect to systems, extract data, transform, manipulate, model data, and then load it. And there's over 400 of these little blue boxes, which we call transformers. They use records, use and produce records, which we call features. So when you think of a record, we would call that a feature. And then features, of course, have attributes, or that's what we call fields. So a record is a feature, and a field is an attribute in FME lingo. So you're going to see those terms and hear those terms as we go. So I'm going to start with a demo just to get us going, and I'm going to move an account from Salesforce over to another CRM called Zoho, and that's just a nice lightweight CRM that I chose to work with. And so here's an account. It's Hoverboards Co. Exploding, doing lots of business, these hoverboard people. And we want to move this single account over to this CRM here. So that's from Salesforce over to Zoho CRM. Right now, there's only 2 accounts in Zoho. There's the Canadian Space Agency, where Chris Hadfield was employed, and then of course Disney, where I believe Mickey Mouse is employed. Okay, so let's actually go and look at the workspace here. This is FME Workbench, and here's our workflow. I'm going to hit run. I have engineered this and built and authored this workspace to ask for a single account, which I will then convert. You could, of course, do multiple accounts. You could do contacts, whatever you want. This will run through and move that. It'll read that data out of that Salesforce system, remodel the data, and then write it out to Zoho CRM. And I can tell by the numbers that it's done. So we're going to come up here, and I'm going to refresh Zoho. And there's our Hoverboards & Co. record moved over. Again, very simple example. You could do way more records or different types of records. That's just one example. And we're going to come back to that example and look at it more in depth coming up. But I wanted to get your juices flowing and starting to think about that example right now. Now we're going to get into a few case studies related to these enterprise systems. The first one is from Calderdale Council over in the UK. And what they're doing is they're integrating Oracle CRM and a third-party contractor portal. So let's look at the actual case study. What was happening is we have citizens. They have citizens that need their garbage collected, and sometimes the garbage collection was missed. So they would submit reports on a website. Those reports then needed to go to a service delivery team, and so they put in place an integration. However, the integration was losing requests, so they said, okay, let's try FME. The details of that are the workspace needs to read, the workflow or workspace needs to read a SOAP XML feed, an XML service, SOAP service, get a number of reports out of Oracle, and then turn that into XML and or read that XML and then push that to a third-party service. And it effectively looks like this. This is an abstraction of really the workspace, what it would look like. Reading with the HTTP caller transformer, getting that data from the SOAP service, fragmenting or really taking a list of records and breaking it down into individual records, pulling the information out with the XML query extractor, and then writing the messages individually to the third-party contractor portal. And of course, this worked out for them, and it's been a working solution, not losing any messages and any reports anymore. Now I want to dig into some of these individual transformers. The HTTP caller is really the key to unlocking any of these services that are out there that perhaps it looks like FME doesn't support, and you can generally add support for them using the HTTP caller. And you can see on the right there, there's a request URL. That's your endpoint, and then you can pick different methods, and then there's lots and lots of different options. XML transformers, of course, you saw a couple of them there for pulling apart the data. There's also XML transformers for putting together the data, and lots of things in between, including validating your XML and formatting your XML as well. Now I want to look at some of those transformers back in that example that we looked at before, the Zoho example. So I'm going to pull back out, and we're going to look again at this workflow where I moved the hoverboards across, the hoverboards account across. This Salesforce reader comes in, reads out that account, gives you a bunch of attributes or fields, really. Those are then taken over into this transformer called the XML Templater. If I come in here, I can see the actual template is right here that I'm filling out. And here are the fields that are coming from Salesforce. So I insert those into my XML to create the XML. And then I use the HTTP caller over here to then send out to the appropriate endpoint, in this case for Zoho. And so here's the endpoint for creating records in Zoho using the post method. And in this case, the XML is sent as a query string parameter. But it could be, if it was a different service, it could be in the body, or in, you even could be in the header, or any number of different things. Any number of different ways of working with an endpoint can be done with this HTTP caller. So that's sort of a deeper dive into that workflow, into those two transformers and the Salesforce reader. Okay. So back into the presentation, we're going to keep going. And of course, when you create one of these integrations, generally you're going to want it to happen without clicking, and you want to schedule it, and that's built into FME Server as a scheduler. Here, that particular workflow is set up to run every day. Of course, it could be every 30 minutes. It could be once a month. It could be every half day. It's up to you, but there is a built-in scheduler for that. And I'm going to do another case study here. I'm going to talk about integrating, in this case, Salesforce CRM again, and a Fulcrum mobile data. Whoops. Let me get back to the slide there. And a Fulcrum mobile data collection platform. So this is our good friends Surrey Heath, again over in the UK. I'm flipping around here, my apologies. Surrey Heath. And the challenge here is, and this is really a pure form of digital transformation, they were actually sending people, tax inspectors out in the field to verify property details. They still do that, but they were doing that with paper. And they would have to write all the stuff on paper, all the information on paper, come back to the office and then re-enter it. So they went digital, and to do that, they used a mobile app data collection service called Fulcrum. It's a platform for creating apps for collecting data. And they stored the actual information back out of the field. They stored that in the Salesforce CRM. And so they needed something to do the synchronization between the two. And the solution that they ended up with looks basically like this, where they read out of Salesforce the information that they'll use to populate the mobile app forms, create JSON. So in this case, it's JSON that is then sent to the Fulcrum service. That's what it accepts at its endpoint. Then they go out in the field. The people go out in the field. They do the actual field inspection, and they come back to the office. And again, another integration is run, which takes the JSON from Fulcrum, breaks it down from a set of records into individual records, breaks down the records so that it have attributes or fields, which are then fed into the Salesforce writer and ultimately sent back to the Salesforce CRM. And of course, really, it's transformed the way they do their field inspection, as you can imagine, moving from paper to digital would do. So we'll dig into some of the transformers there. JSON is much like XML. XML and JSON are formats on the web, really, for messaging, quite common. JSON being the cool new kid on the block, I'd say. On the top three transformers we can see here are really for bringing in JSON and actually pulling information out of the JSON to go into a different system. The bottom four are really about creating JSON, formatting it, validating it, updating JSON documents to be then sent out to another system. Now I want to revisit this CRM account example this demo that we did, and reimagine it for real time. And I'll explain what that means right now. So this existing Salesforce reader that you may have used in the past uses something called the Salesforce Bulk API. The bulk API is a great API for working with millions and millions of records, or even thousands of records. What it does is it sends a request that goes into a queue. That queue is then processed. You may not get the data back for minutes. So it's not as real time as a different API they have called the REST API. And so I wanted to reimagine this example using Salesforce's REST API. And again, I want to move that hoverboards company record from Salesforce over to Zoho. So I'm going to delete the record that we had up there. Let me escape out of here. I'm going to delete that record that went into Zoho. Delete it. And I'll refresh it just so you know it's not there. So we're going to take this record, move it over using this REST API. There, it's prompting me again. I've told it to do that. And I can tell by the numbers it's gone through. Again, I can refresh. So what's the difference here? The difference is this is a synchronous call, which will go and get the data right away and then work with it. And this was actually not built into FME. I had to engineer this, but I didn't have to code. That's the key thing about it. So if I come into the HTTP caller, I put in the endpoint for the Salesforce REST API. I said it's a GET method. In the queue parameter, I put in the actual query. This is SOQL, Salesforce Object Query Language, I believe it is. Similar to SQL. I said, give me the account name where it matches the one that I prompt for. And I also authenticated with OAuth. And I want to run through that workflow because it's pretty crucial to really unlocking any web service. So to authenticate, I just come through. I select Salesforce in this case, click Authenticate. This is going to pop up Salesforce, an actual page on Salesforce. So now we're over in Salesforce trying to get a token, really. Salesforce is smart enough. It goes, well, this looks like a new device or a new thing. Well, actually, generally it would, but I've already authenticated once. But normally it would prompt you also for a token. And I'll show that token here. Here's a token that I would have got and put in previously. So this is for sort of ensuring that you are who you say you are. I would have been prompted, place that in there, and then the web connection is saved. So the actual authentication is saved here. I can reuse that in different workspaces. And if a token changes for that Salesforce connection, I can just update that in one spot. Okay. So that's the authentication, and any sort of modern web service will require this type of authentication, and you can build in new authentication definitions into FME with no code. Okay, so I pulled out the information from the CRM. It's JSON, so I come in and I fragment it. Here I'm saying, okay, the records are at this query location, flatten them out. You can see coming back from the caller, I don't have any attributes or what we call fields. I pass them through, turn it into records, and then I pull down and I can see the flattener actually gives me the actual records I'm looking for. And then I go along to the XML templater, just like we saw before in the other example, create our XML, and then push it off to Zoho. So two different ways of using Salesforce and showing you the extensibility of FME to add new web services in and deal with JSON or XML, whatever it might be. Of course, since we're talking about real time, once you have a workflow like that, you're going to want to trigger that more in a real-time fashion. So not in a scheduled fashion, which runs every half an hour or something. In Salesforce, they have something called Apex triggers, which will use callouts to, let's, for example, imagine we added a new account into Salesforce. There could be a trigger that then sends that information out to another system via a webhook. It turns out that FME server supports webhooks, of course, and so that Salesforce system can push that information out to FME server, which then runs the integration we just saw to then push without having to read the Salesforce part, of course, but the second half to push that account record to the Zoho CRM. So we're keeping going here. We want to know now what type of ERP or financial system you work with in your organization. And so, okay, good. Now we're going to shift and talk not about CRM so much. Of course, we will talk a bit about CRMs, but more about financial and accounting systems. At SAFE, we actually had the challenge of integrating a new ERP system. NetSuite is what we selected. And I watched and I saw the demo on how they actually did the integration between Salesforce and NetSuite. And I recorded some of the common challenges, and I want to talk about some of those and how you can address them with FME. So for field names and values, there's definitely a need to deal with those. And a transformer called the Attribute Manager is a good one for helping you there, whether it's renaming a field or what you might call copying from one field to another, providing a default for a field as it goes into a new system, or taking multiple fields and bringing those into a single field in another system, or the opposite of that, taking a single field in the source system and exploding that into multiple values. That kind of stuff can be done in the Attribute Manager transformer. A very common one when you have two different systems is that they represent similar concepts with different values. And it's common in one system to use a more generic set of values, such as you can see here the utilities, well, gas, electric, and water in one system is represented as a single value called utilities in another system. A very common use case when going between systems. And the Attribute Valuemapper can help you with that. Here we've hard-coded the values in there, but you're probably thinking, well, what if my values are actually stored in an external lookup table? Haha, no problem there. You can connect to those external tables, join on some keys, and then bring in those bring in the values that you need via a lookup table. So completely doable. Of course, when you are pushing data from one system to another, you're going to want to know whether that data is actually valid or not. For a simple example that we see often is one system supports 50 characters worth of data, and the source system maybe supports 100 characters with the data. This validation can make sure to flag any data that will be truncated before it's like written in and then you lose it, basically. That's one example. On the right, you can see a tester, which is just checking a domain. So billing country coming from the source system can only be one of these options on the right. And if it's not one of those options, then it can be flagged. So lots of rich tools in FME for doing that actual validation of data. And that brings me over to Gerald Dotson. And this is really, you've heard me speak. You've heard me kind of talk about FME and show a couple examples, but I think it's a lot more powerful to hear from somebody who's actually on the ground doing the work, and that's Gerald, and this is a great presentation. So, excellent.
Good, okay. So, we've listened to Aaron speak, and Aaron, you said that you were with SAFE for about 10 years now?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking last night, if I totally botched this presentation, it doesn't change my pay at all, but you allowing me to present with you might change your status there at SAFE. So it's been fun working with you.
It will only be for the better, Gerald. I know what you're going to talk about. I know what you're capable of. It'll be good.
So anyway, let's go ahead and launch this thing. And I'm Gerald Dotson with Grant Beauty. We're in Central Washington State. We own and operate 2 hydroelectric power facilities on the Columbia River. And I won't go into too much detail about that, but our customer base is in the 40 to 45,000 range. However, we produce enough power for over 800,000 homes. And so we push a lot of power out to other areas, and it keeps paying my paycheck. So I'm good with that. So within FME, it supports reader providers for over 400 different file formats. And of those formats, between 20 to 40% are considered non-spatial. file formats, and you think, well, why 20 to 40%? That's a big range, and the reason for that is if we take, for instance, Microsoft Excel. Excel, you can in the columns or the cells of Microsoft, you can have lat long values, and those values then could be spatially mapped. But so, do you classify Excel as a spatial format or not? And so that's why we get that big range. And so then with the file formats that SAFE has allowed us, these non-integrated or these non-spatial file formats, it leaves a real broad area for us to start working with the non-spatial. And so that's where we're at here. And in order to do that, here at Grant, I need to drop back a little bit into history. And so we're going to drop back about 5 to 6 years. And now about 6 years ago, I was the technical lead on our GIS upgrade project. And one of the critical tasks for that, the upgrade of that GIS system, was that it would integrate to our financials. We had GIS software. There's a electrical design utility in there, and so from that it gets large numbers of materials that then have to be transferred over to our financial system. And we had contractors, one for our financials because the financials was going through an upgrade as well, and we had contractors for our GIS system. And basically, they had agreed to go ahead and create that interface. And this is what they originally thought. They originally thought that it was just going to be a pretty straight, apples to apples, just a standard data push into from the GIS development into the financial software. And the reason it needed to go to financials again was for billing and also accounting of those materials. Instead, this is really what it turned out to be. It was more that in the GIS software, it was pretty much bare bones, the information that was coming across. It's basically little data seeds, if you will. And then on the financial side, over there, what they were looking for was almost down to how much sunshine each tree received and the gallons of water used, and also the final dietary nutrients each apple would provide. I mean, they wanted it broke down into everything. So for our contractors, weeks turned into months, and we still had nothing. They had no projection on what was going to, when we were going to have that interface. So this is actually a small utility design, and in it you'll see that there's roughly 30 assembly units, and I'll describe what assembly units are. In fact, we'll do that right now. An assembly unit is a composite of stock items, and so in this particular example here, we've got a power pole and a help me out there. You think cross arm, and this cross arm is made up of stock items. And so here you've got your insulator, and you've got your insulator standoff, and the cross arm itself, and cross arm supports, and then the bolts actually that tie that cross arm to the pole. This, rather than calling out each one of these stock items individually, we say, give us a 7-foot cross arm assembly unit. And so that comprises all of this area here. Makes it very efficient, very quick. Well, that's what's in the that description here, assembly units. They're composite of all those stock items. And so I just wanted to drive that point home because it's pretty essential. So this again is the information that has to go across to our financial system, and this is what it's like over on the financial system. You can see that it totally gets exploded. It's was completely blown out, and our contractors, they were like, "How do we do that?" This isn't a simple apples to apples like I was stating before. And so So also in that integration, what was required was validation. You know, for instance, if a assembly unit was called out, well, is that assembly unit still valid? Does it still have the same stock items that it did previously? Because those things change, you know, as we get different vendors that supply different materials. And so the integration had to validate. And then also if there's substitutions, for instance, back on that particular shot where we had the cross arm tying into the pole, if we had for a particular situation, a larger pole than typical, you'd have to swap those bolts out that anchor that cross arm for a longer bolt. And so the integration had to be able to go into that particular assembly unit at that location within the design and pull that bolt out or bolts out and insert the new bolts, update the costs, also update the costs in the assembly unit itself, and also roll those costs up into the project. And that's only one of the caveats of the integration. And so they were kind of scratching their heads saying, phew, you know, this is more than we anticipated. So here we are, you know, somebody's got to build it, right? So I found myself in one of those meetings where the same issue was playing out all over again. The issue where we described the interface as a mandatory requirement, and the contractor going back with, well, it's a whole lot more than we had anticipated, so it's going to take more time and more money. So at that point, that's when I raised my hand and I said, well, I can build it in FME. And that's when they all looked at me and said, well, what's FME, you know? So they, my management, you know, because just like all the rest of you, I've got an awful lot on my plate. You know, we stay busy. And so they didn't want me wasting a lot of time building something or working to build something that our contractors were failing to provide. You know, it had been literal months. And so I don't know if they were just trying to appease me or what the situation was, but they said, okay, Gerald, you've got 2 weeks to provide a proof of concept. And I was thinking to myself, 2 weeks? You got to be crazy. You know, I knew that our contract had been working for months. I also knew that we had one of our own internal programmers that had, because this, like I said, this interface was critical to us. One of our own programmers had been working for 2 months plus to try and develop something and writing code, and he was still struggling with that, working through it. But regardless, you know, you take what you can get, and so 2 weeks it was, and. You know, I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't a frantic 2 weeks. You know, I was working. I was trying to get this thing done. But after 2 weeks, we reconvened and we sat down with those folks and showed the demo of this proof of concept. And quite literally, we knocked their socks off. I mean, they were flat out amazed at what could be produced with FME. In fact, they literally asked me that question. You know, this was created with FME, and I said, yeah. You know, and so anyway, they gave me the green light to continue, and so from there, you know, just push through. Now, this is part of the final solution. You know, it wasn't in that initial prototype, but what it is through FME server, we produce these dynamic web pages that are kicked out, and so our engineering designers, they can go in and select the particular project they're working on and what warehouse the materials are coming out of, and also, you know, is the labor going to come from our own people, or is it going to be, you know, outside contractors? And the latest version of this also has cost centers in there as well, and that they can just pull from the drop down. Then it does that validation that I was telling you about, you know, where we're looking at, is this a valid assembly unit, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And if it validates, then they can go ahead and upload that to our Dynamics GP. That's what our financial software is Dynamics GP. And so we push right into that. So this is the main workspace. And the reason I say main workspace is because that solution is actually 3 workspaces that are tagged together, you know, as one passes, you know, for instance, the validation component, then it'll go ahead and pass to the next. And I realize that you can't see the detail that's back behind here, but that's not the important part. What I wanted to point out here is that FME allows you to use transformers, like Aaron had mentioned, and these transformers are key. They're what make things fly in this, is because just like, you know, I was referencing the stock items that make up the assembly units previously. Well, in these transformers, if you can look at the transformers as those assembly units and the actual literal coding behind the scenes as the stock items, these transformers are just assembly units. You know, they're totally loaded with information, and so you don't have to spend time typing out, you know, letter by letter your coding. You grab these transformers, you drop them in, and you connect them up logically, and you're good to go. This particular item here, this feature merger, it allows me to pull in 2 different data streams into this feature merger. You can see here where it's just a standard SQL join where I'm joining the assembly unit on the item number. And as those items are merged, then it's pushed out as a single data stream, and just powerful tools that are available to us here, and so moving on. Okay, so we got through that the financials, and let's move down that history line about another 3 years, and at this point we're in the state of upgrading our CIS system, our customer information system, and our customer information system is also business critical. As you can see, it's deals with our billing, and like most companies, if we don't have, unless you're totally government, no, I should retract that. I'm sorry. If you don't have a revenue stream, you don't last long. Your company withers and dies. And so we were in the process of replacing the customer information system. And customer information, billing, this financials, and as I had mentioned previously, and this is another tag into the Dynamics GP, is that our customer information system had to also tie into Dynamics GP. And again, I realize that you can't see the detail that's in here. That's, again, immaterial. What I do want to point out, though, is the readers up here that are reading from our CIS system. And this is an Oracle-based, the CC&B is our CIS system, and customer care and billing. And we're going to run through all of this and then finally push out to our Dynamics GP with XML. And so, again, I'm touching on some of the things that Aaron had already hit, but anyway, we're going to do it anyway. So, as I'd mentioned, the readers here we've got a database reader, and it's an Oracle reader, and so we're pulling data out of one of the tables there within Oracle, but also utilizing a SQL creator. And the power behind the SQL creators is it allows you to basically put your SQL select statements into that creator, so that when you launch this workspace, you're able to pull directly the information that you need from those tables. And you can see this one has a join in it. And also, though, you can pass in user parameters that allow these select statements to be customizable on the flow. Basically, just as you kick off that workspace, you can throw in variables or user parameters that allow you to tailor just exactly the data that's coming through. So anyway, I wanted to hit that. Also, as we move on down through, though, the SQL creator and the SQL executor are basically siblings, so to speak, except that the creator is in the start. As you launch the workspace is when that one kicks off and generates a data stream. The SQL executor is actually in the data stream, and so it's triggered by data that comes into it. Now, this particular one, it actually is running a stored procedure within the Dynamics GP database, and so it runs this get next GL wrapper or GE wrapper, excuse me. But it's creating a journal entry, and so by running that stored procedure, it generates that new journal entry, and then it has a select from the table that journal entry has been generated in to pull that back and tag those values onto the records that are coming through that particular pipe or data stream. And so just, again, tremendous flexibility, tremendous power. Now, lastly, in that particular interface is, I had mentioned the XML templater. You can see that there's several data streams that roll into this transformer, and it's collecting that data, and it's been structured to be pushed out as XML. And I'll show you in the next slide, I'll show you an example of what's coming through. But this is fed into a web service with Dynamics GP and consumed by that particular our financials software. So this is just a clip out of that XML that's been created. Here's that journal entry that was generated by the stored procedure, and you know, the word that comes to mind right now is, you know, it's just so cool what you can do. You know, you just gotta kind of just let your mind wander, you know, when a problem is presented. Maybe that's what FME stands for, Aaron. I don't know, you know. Free my expression. I don't know what it is, but regardless, it's pretty cool what you can do. So back to that CIS upgrade project that we're on. The CIS system, the customer information system, is tied to a whole host of different applications. I'll show a slide here in a minute that shows a lot of those interfaces. But the thing is that there was we had SSIS utilized, we had .NET, we had SQR, we had a bunch of other applications that were utilized as interfacing tools to the outside world and to other applications within our company. And so what I wanted to point out here is this was SQR that I pulled from that legacy project. And you'll note here that I actually did some work back then too. And this one's stamped 2005, right? Also, when I was cooking this out, I saw one for 2008. So I was fluent in it, in SQR, back in 2008. When I look at this code now, I'm thinking, holy cow, I couldn't code in SQR to save my life right now. You know, it's just totally foreign to me. But 10 years from now, I'm thinking that I could drop back into an FME workspace and pretty much pick back up and keep on running, you know, because the transformers have the code, and the workspaces or workbench is intuitive enough that you can take a look at it and just pick right back up. So just a tremendous tool. So this is that slide I was referencing that talks about here in the interior is our CIS system, and Oracle CC&B, that's what our new CIS system is. And out on the outside edge here, you can see a lot of different applications that we're interfacing with. This is our GIS system. I think this is our trouble reporting system. Microsoft GP, like I mentioned before. Here's our online billing over here, and meter reading and Bank of America. And so these used to be, all these interfaces used to be other products, other tools that were typically coded. Now these have all been replaced with FME. So this whole band of interfaces is now FME. The communication from our CIS system to the world is through the FME interfaces. And so you can see that we've taken this single tool that used to be multiple languages, you know, or the interfaces that used to be multiple languages, and in order to go in and make modifications if something would come up to those interfaces, we'd have to find people that were still fluent in those languages. And like I just mentioned, you know, languages fade if you don't use them. Now we've got a common platform that interfaces to everything for the CIS system, and within the workspaces, we also heavily document. We use the annotation capabilities within the workspace to basically call out logic that was used. We reference in some situations functional user decisions, because that drives some of our logic, so that if we go down the road and we say, man, why did we choose to do it this way? Well, there's a documentation there that says this was the agreement that was made at the particular time, and this is the reason we've done this. So it just eliminates confusion down the road. Also, if there are custom views that were used to help facilitate, database calls and things, that is captured in the workspace as well. So the workspace becomes basically a one-stop shop for the information, so that you can drop into it and readily pick up, what was going on at the time. Why was this designed this way? So anyway, not to beat that horse to death, I'll go ahead and continue to move on here. So I bring this slide up because in the original meeting or original meetings, when we brought in our paid contracting group to help us with the integration, the senior manager, because we had kind of a tight timeline, in a fairly large meeting, he wanted to know who the integration team was for Grant County. And when I spoke up and said, I am them, he was pretty dismayed. And he repeated the question, and when that was validated by others that no, Gerald's the one that's going to be doing the integrations, again, he honestly wasn't very happy about that. And he finally came right out and said, now, is this just theory, or have you actually built integrations with FME? And I had to respond, yes, I have, and I know what I'm doing. It's like, back the truck up, get out of my face kind of situation. But so we proceeded, and the really amazing, let me back up. See, his frame of reference when he was approaching me with those questions is he was familiar with integrations that had been literally coded. And coding takes a great deal of time. And like I mentioned before, with the transformers, you're able to just drop those into the workspace and move on. Yes, there's some configuration within those transformers, but most of that work, 99% of the work has already been captured within those transformers. And so he was looking at it, this is going to take, months and months and months to get done. And as you can see here, if we start taking a look at it, and this is, I grabbed this out of one of our status reports from the project. This was a slide that was in there, and you can see this first interface. It's 3 days. 3 days was the start, estimated complete, and complete. Here's another one. Let's see. I'm guessing. Don't know how many days off the top of my head right now, but anyway, 40 hours, so that's 5 days for that, complete. That's just unheard of for people that don't understand that things can be rapidly developed. Now, yes, I'll admit that this hasn't been, it hasn't gone through the total testing phase, but most of these went through without any issues whatsoever. So anyway, it's just, also I want to point out that yes, the schedule did change, as with all projects. This, things shifted around, and so, but the final outcome from this is that all of these interfaces were completed on time, exceeded expectations, and were actually, we increased the capabilities of these interfaces in the process. There was also an additional interface that was added in here, and that was to monitor the CIS system, because the CC&B CIS system doesn't have a batch monitoring. And batch is when all the transactions that happen during a day are, rather than processing those through the day, because it takes quite a bit of calculations and this, that, and the other thing, which slows the system down. Those are all pushed off to the non-business hours during the evening to do that batching. And so the batch process if it falls over during the evening hours, when you come back in the next morning, it is chaos. For our company, we have right around 50 plus individuals that are sitting, waiting, doing nothing, waiting for the system to come back up online. And I used to support the CIS system years ago, and so I know what a nightmare it is, and it takes hours to bring the system back up. So we have this monitoring interface that looks. It runs SQL statements against the database as it's processing, so it knows if something is running longer than it should, if something hasn't started. If anything crops up, it sends out an email to our support personnel so that they can get in and get things corrected. It also sends an email. Our support staff wanted an email that said, batch is completed successfully. Basically, when they receive that, and it comes in about 8:30, 8:35, when they receive that, it's like, okay, everything's good, and they can go to sleep, Otherwise, they're just petrified, waiting for the morning to roll in. So I wanted to point this out. This is pretty critical, and I see that I'm running late on time, but I'm hurrying here. Is that, like I mentioned, the emails that come out, we trap the errors in the workspace, and those particular errors, in the validation process are sent into this bookmark that I've created that basically utilizes FME server email generators and pushes emails out. But the key point here is that not only error that is pulled in, it is also the email is then loaded with all the corrective steps that are necessary so that when something happens, they don't have to. Our support staff don't have to sit there and troubleshoot the issue. The issue's already presented. It's got all the steps. So if it's been a year and a half since the problem has presented itself before, they already know what to do. It's all right there. And so correcting these issues now becomes very quick, very concise, it's been a lifesaver. So here's an email that was created from our water quality readings. This one's out of range. This one didn't have the full values for the 12-hour saturation calculations, and so it's saying these are the readings that might be in question. This is the raw data, and so in the email it provides hot links that they can jump right back and take a look at the raw data. And also in this email, and like I said, this is just a simple error that's coming in, but this is all loaded into the email for them when they receive it. It also tells them how to read the file, that raw data file. So there's no question, it's all right there. What we're into now, and I won't go into it very deeply, is that we're into our the project that's on the plate now is we're moving into advanced metering infrastructure, AMI, smart meters, and basically the interfaces are going to be developed with FME. That's our tool of choice now. So there was a little bit more here that I was going to hit, but I'm not going to in the interest of time. And the very last item that I wanted to point out is that in one of the other presentations, a question that came up that I had plenty of time to think about was they were saying, man, we'd love to do this in our company, but we don't know how we're going to get our managers to buy off on this. They basically don't trust that we can do the work. And I thought back to that, and it was that put up or shut up moment way back in with that GIS project that basically they were able to see proof of concept. They were able to see what we can produce. And so, if they can just see what you're able to do when these challenges and opportunities present themselves, that will change their mind. It did here, and so you can see that we've gone from only spatial integrations that were locked into our GIS realm to we're using it across the company now for business critical applications. So again, if you can take that opportunity to go ahead and create and present to them, we'll take a look at what we're able to do. I think you'll get a lot of traction with that. And so with that, Aaron, I'm going to shut up and pass it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Gerald. Awesome presentation. I think we're basically, so I'll switch over here. We're basically at the point where we can start to do Q&A, and I've got some questions for you, but perhaps we can take some questions from the audience as well. I think, Dale, are you going to join us on here to chat as well?
Yes, I am. I don't know if all my audio is working, but wow, I was very, very impressed with all that I saw this morning. But I do want to ask Gerald, what was FME again standing for? I've heard it called the Ferocious Memory Eater, but I don't think I ever heard it called what you said.
I think I said free my expression. I can't remember. I was on the fly.
Free mind. Yeah, free my expression or free mind expression. Either one sounds pretty good.
There you go. All right. So that's your takeaway from the presentation, huh, Dale?
That's the main one. There's also other, but I got a couple of questions for you, Gerald. In terms of the advanced metering infrastructure, will FME play in all of those different interfaces, or maybe you can chat about that a bit more?
Yes, at this point, that's what we're looking at, is that all of those interfaces will be going through FME. Probably the most critical one will be the final stage, and that is with the meter reads that come back out of our AMI system. And the reason for that is it's not just, for our residentials, yes, we have the register reads, and so we bill at the end of the month, and so there's bill schedules, but for our commercial customers, we've got also demand. So the reason for that is if their systems spike that demand way up, we have to provide the infrastructure to support that, and so that has a cost on us, and so we recoup that by getting highest demand. And then for the large industrial customers, they have multiple meters, and so out of all those meters, we're pulling reads back every 15 minutes. We have to calculate, okay, in any given time slot, what is the max demand across all those multiple meters that they've got? And then lastly, net metering, where we've got people that have wind or solar, they're putting power back into the grid, then we need to be able to calculate all that. And the AMI system does not do that, and the CIS system doesn't do that. And so we're looking at FME in that integration, that ground there, to do all that collation and calculation and everything in that FME interface, so we can pass basically it's a bill file into our CIS system, so that billing can be done on that. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. We're going to continue with the Q&A, but I want to thank those who have attended the webinar. I appreciate your time. And if you're taking off, that's thanks for hanging out. And if you're going to stick around, we're going to do some more Q&A. So thanks a lot. Okay, so I'll fire another question at you, Gerald. You talked about sort of doing the testing on the integrations. And I'm curious, how do you guys do sort of staging, or how do you make changes to an existing integration? Is there a workflow, or is it more ad hoc, or maybe you could talk about that?
Yeah, you're trying to get me in trouble now.
Maybe I shouldn't ask this.
No, it's all good. We have a pretty formalized process here where we do work in development environments. We test in those environments. For the general. To make just validation of the concepts that we're doing. Then that's passed into a test environment where it's in essence a clean duplicate of our production environment to ensure that what we're pushing into production then is going to work that way, because we can't bring production down. And so when we know that through our test environment that's gone in without challenge, then we've got a very high confidence level that when that is moved into production, it'll be business as usual.
Excellent. If Dale's there, I'm going to put him on the spot. Any opportunity to get Dale to speak is good. I've got a question here, Dale. What's the difference between FME and the other BI tools out there? So I'll throw that over to you.
Well, thanks, Aaron, for giving me such a nice, soft, easy question. Well, I think that, first of all, I don't think I would call FME a BI tool particularly. I would call us more of a data integration tool. We don't really, a true BI tool or business intelligence would give you lots of high-end graphs and interact analysis, and we aren't as much about that. So we're about moving the data from wherever it is to where it needs to go. Gerald's comments around doing that quickly. is easily and in a very understandable way. That's where we add, I think, lots of value. So, you know, on one end, you could be writing code, and as Gerald said, and I've heard from other customers, the code writers, you know, they love their craft, and hey, I'm a code writer too. But if you're going to be writing code that's moving data around, FME is going to beat you every time, because we've done all that heavy lifting, and we ultimately just give someone the tool for configuring that code, and that's configuring is going to take a lot less time than writing it from scratch. That's why schedules like the one Gerald showed are going to win. So we think FME is a very powerful tool in terms of data integration tools. We think we're actually more powerful than most others that are in our league. We're certainly the only data integration tool that understands spatial things at the same time, although that's not the focus of this talk today. But the fact that we came from spatial means that our foundation is very rich and solid. We were ready to handle complexity. So when we have all those tools, situations like Gerald's become easier to tame because tools are there. So there's these tools for dealing with SQL, for dealing with XML, JSON, they're all there. And as Gerald said too, and I've had other customers say, they can come back to FME workspaces sometimes years. I remember one of our first customers gave a talk at our first user conference, and he had gone higher in his career, not as involved hands-on, but something happened at his office, and after not using FME for 5 years, he remembered he'd solved this problem before once, dug out old, dusted it off, fired it up, put the answers was that first 5 years knew what he had last used, and so Gerald's comment about looking at old code and trying to figure it out is true. I really don't know that you could walk up to a piece of code you wrote 5 years ago in Perl and make sure that it works if you hadn't touched Perl in the meantime. So those would be some of the things that I would say kind of differentiate us. Another key thing is that FME at the core level works one record at a time, and many of the other BI tools work a whole table at a time. And so the fact that we work one record at a time makes us very nimble and flexible for interesting integration problems. So those would be a couple of my answers. What do you think of those, Aaron?
I think those are pretty good. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dale. We've got a question here. Can I get a trial of FME? And absolutely, you can get a trial of FME if you go to safe.com. You'll be able to click the links there and get a free trial. I think it's 14 days, but we're pretty happy to give you extensions, and we want you to have success.
I think maybe we might tell people it's 14 days, but it's really 30.
Is it really? Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's the way it used to be, but
maybe it's 30 now. You know what? Under promise and over deliver, I guess.
So there's a couple of great questions coming in, Aaron. I see one person asking about transferring from one ArcGIS server service to another. I've never done that, but I believe that we can do that with our feature service reader and then a feature service writer. So you could just say things like, have you done it?
Yep, and I think we're having a bit of challenge with your audio, Dale. We're getting sort of a robot sound, unless you've changed your voice. I think it's. But yeah, absolutely. Can you facilitate the transfer of ArcGIS server service from one to another? We're pretty confident we can. There's another question. Can you use FME to manage other enterprise servers, for example, Esri and Oracle? I would say yes. It also says, can it be used as a DevOps tool? Which I'd have to DevOps. If it's integrations, then yes. If that's what that question.
Well, I think what they're wondering there is, can you use FME to spin up servers and so on? And I would say if there is a REST API, we can do that. And I also hinted that we haven't done it yet, but we're going to flirt with using FME to start and stop Docker containers. And if you can do that, then now we're talking DevOps big time.
Yeah, and for sure you can start and stop FME cloud instances using REST API. So you can use FME to start FME cloud and to stop it and orchestrate.
Yes, I've seen that for sure.
Yeah.
So Aaron, Darren's question about connecting legacy systems via making APIs. I think, have you even done a webinar on that once, Aaron?
Let's see. Number of legacy. I'm not sure if I have, but I mean, that's certainly doable. Legacy systems generally will have either JDBC access, or you can directly access underlying tables, or it's SOAP services as well. And we do have a new article just released in the knowledge base on reading and writing SOAP, working with SOAP services. So, I mean, in general, I'd say you can. Creating an API wrapper, I guess, is more the question here. I have done that before, where you actually would have a service that represents a REST API almost.
Yes.
I've done that. You can do that with a combination. I would say that probably a winning formula there, if you can use the cloud, is to use Amazon's API gateway to define the API there, and that produces what's called a REST API, which is documented with something called Swagger. It's a pretty standard tool. We use it for our REST API documentation. That actual Amazon API gateway would then call FME workspaces underneath. So absolutely you can do that. And there's ways to do it on premises as well. I'm not sure if I've seen one in the wild, but definitely people are doing that sort of thing.
I think actually, I'm going to look it up here maybe while we're going, and I think Stuart perhaps has done a webinar on this, because it feels like we did do that once. But the idea of FME to kind of create APIs and wrapping legacy systems definitely has been done. Actually, I saw it done by some friends at Natural Resources Canada, NRCan, at their Sherbrooke office. They have used FME Server to wrap some legacy systems of theirs and provide a REST API with some value add. So I have seen that done for sure.
Yeah, there's probably there is somewhere on the world tour. There's probably been a presentation on this. Yeah.
You know, also, Aaron, if I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Something that just continues to impress me with the tool is that whatever challenge that we've come up against, there's always been a solution in there. Sometimes you got to step back and look at it from different angles, but there's always a solution. And one of the, and Dale, this is kudos to your company as well, is that your staff, they are more than happy to jump in and help. And so I have utilized that resource extensively when, you know, if I come up against a challenge, I'll get a hold of experts there at SAFE, and they walk me through things. So
well, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
And Gerald, I got a kind of a funny story. Iris Gutowski, I probably didn't say that right, but she used to work in support, and now she's moved on to be a project manager, and also works in our FME server team on the UI. She says that you're actually her favorite customer. So.
Oh my goodness, she lies. She lies. Yeah, but no, you know that those web pages that I showed you for the GIS to financials. Those web pages, she helped me build those. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So she was a huge asset. I mean, indispensable, quite honestly. No, she's key. Yeah, she's top. Don't lose her. So,
no, she's a shining star. And Dale has just chatted out a link to that presentation on making APIs with FME. So if you check in the chat, you'll be able to see a link to that. I chatted about the Salesforce REST API, and there's a question here, will that be in 2018? And the REST API support versus the bulk API support, I think actually the question is, the answer is probably yes, but we may do it in a different way. We're sort of looking at how we can be more agile and how we deliver solutions, especially web-based solutions. And so we're thinking the FME hub may be somewhere where we put a solution like that. However, that's subject to what happens in the future. We'll say that.
Yeah, certainly the direction is that, I think, Aaron, you coined it, but agile delivery. Is that what you call it?
That's what I call it, yeah.
So that, because the other part around some of these web services is that they actually, I think Gerald was saying too, that the world does tend to change. And so in the face of change, how do you react? And one of the places where there is lots of changes on these different REST APIs of web services that are out there. And so we don't want to make you have to get a new FME every time Twitter changes their API, for example. You know, that's a theoretical thing that might happen. I'm being facetious because it actually has happened, and the Twitter transformers in FME right now don't work because we have to upgrade them. And if you want to get that, you're going to have to get FME 2017.11 in about 3 or 4 weeks. That will fix that. We want to change that so that all that happens is Twitter's changed. You get a little notice inside your FME saying, hey, you're using a Twitter transformer. There's a new version on the hub. Would you like to get it? You can trust those safe guys. They're fine fellows and gals. And so you hit the button and bang, it downloads, and there you go. And so that is where we would want to deliver some interesting Salesforce transformers, for example, ultimately as well.
Yeah, and I've been working, just yesterday I got authentication working for Dynamics financials on 365, so we're working on that as well. We're working on lots of stuff. There's a question here, how do you support other CRMs like Sugar CRM? And I think Sugar CRM, of course, the Sterling folks have figured out how to deal with that one, but I would say in general, our framework using the HTTP caller and being able to define authentication, OAuth authentication, should allow you to add support for any of these sort of CRMs or any kind of cloud-based system that has a REST API. So you may be able to actually add it yourself, and we think maybe that via the hub, people can share them or perhaps at least build them internally. Now, if you want to not do that work, you can always go to the Ideas Exchange and put up an idea. And so I'll pull that up safe to the knowledge base. If you throw an idea in here, you can ask for what you want to be built. And I think maybe Sugar CRM is in here. No, but I'm pretty sure Dynamics is. Yeah, add support for Microsoft Dynamics. So I'm actually working on that in a non-code methodology, so without coding, because I don't know code, so let's just see if I can get it to work. Okay.
Sigbjorn is up late in Norway asking us some questions, and he asks, are there any systems which did not have a REST API that you have successfully integrated through access to the DB itself? And actually, Gerald, was that even the case in your situation, that you were going right after the database, I think, in some of yours, weren't you?
Definitely. Yep, most definitely.
Was that? Go ahead, Gerald.
I was going to say, dependent upon what kind of data we're pulling or pushing, because we like to ensure that our data is kept safe, you know, and that we're not toppling things over. And so it depends on what tables we're actually accessing. If they're critical production, you know, can't stand to have anything happen to them, we don't touch them, and so then we go through a different route. But yes, oftentimes I do tie directly to.
Yeah, I've seen that over the years with people in FME, and you can get away with it and do quite well going right after the underlying database, as long as the schema is well known, or you're not afraid to manage the various joins you have to. It's more dangerous usually writing into those things. Like reading is a little more safe to go after the underlying database than writing. Writing, you generally want to use whatever the API or something like that to be a little more robust.
Or cautious, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Here's a question for you, Gerald, maybe one of the last questions, and we'll close it off. How do you solve the challenge of doing these integrations? Do you do them with one workspace with a lot of functionality, or you go with 10 separate workspaces that match the same functionality, but it's spread across 10? Maybe talk about your experience.
Yeah, fantastic question, and it depends on what the situation is. If it can be logically combined into one workspace, sure, why not? You know, but oftentimes I'll use 2 or 3. I tend to use what I classify as initiator, and what that does is allows the user to basically put parameters in, you know, and so that through that initial one, for instance, if I'm looking for, let's say, I need to process something from 3 days ago, all those dates and all that is then created in that first initiator, and those parameters are then passed into the next workspace. And so I found that to be very useful. So I hope that answers the question, but it's a case by case. But there's a great deal of power in utilizing those FME job submitters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I like I kind of use a programming analogy of separating. You can have one big file with lots of stuff in it, but after a while it gets too unwieldy. So then you create, classes and things like this to kind of abstract it. And I think, it applies with FME as well. So yeah, and it is case by case, I think.
Right. However, in those situations, bookmarks are very, very helpful though, because I will classify things in bookmarks within a workspace so that in this zone, and I'll go ahead and to label that zone, that's what's happening here. And so they've been real helpful.
And just wait until where you can collapse those babies down to a thumbnail and pop them back open again. It's going to be fantastic.
Collapsible bookmarks. I was thinking about saying it, Dale, but I'm glad you said it. That feature is being worked on right now.
All right.
Maybe we'll get Stephanie. We'll get Stephanie to strike it from the record.
Yeah, please. Well, actually, it's one person said, Dale, it sounds like you're being censored with a sort of robotic thing. So
yes. Is it any better now? I noticed that my headset was out of batteries, so I don't have a Tesla battery in my headset. And I'm wired up now. Is it any better?
Well, there's still times when you're being censored, but it's not bad.
Okay.
Okay.
Stephanie.
Yes, Stephanie's pushing the buttons back there. We got the 5-second delay or something. Well, I think that's probably it for questions, and thanks a lot for. Yeah, somebody loves the idea. Carlos Silva loves the idea of the collapsible bookmarks. You got it, Carlos. I think we'll wrap up the questions and answers now. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Thank you very much, Gerald, for sharing what is a truly interesting story.
Yes. Yeah.
Story.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And thanks to Dale for chiming in on the questions, and Laura Wu and Trent Catting for doing Q&A on the back, and Stephanie hosting. Thanks a lot, everybody.